With just over 2 months until the US presidential election, the latest national polls show Vice President and Democratic nominee Kamala Harris essentially neck and neck with her Republican opponent, former President Donald Trump. Vice President Harris has been campaigning in the key battleground state of Georgia, where she also sat down for her first major interview since becoming the Democratic Party nominee. She appeared on CNN alongside her running mate, Tim Walz, and laid out some of her plans for the future and defended her record as part of the Biden administration.
Since starting her run for the presidency just over a month ago, Kamala Harris has mostly appeared in front of adoring crowds like this one in Georgia. On Thursday night, that changed when she sat down with CNN for the first big interview of her campaign. With Americans deeply divided over the war in Gaza, Harris confirmed she would not stop arms shipments to Israel.
I'm unequivocal and unwavering in my commitment to Israel's defense and its ability to defend itself. And that's not going to change. Far too many innocent Palestinians have been killed. And we have got to get a deal done.
Another issue high on voters' minds is migration, with Republicans seeking to attack Harris and the Democrats over the issue, even as illegal border crossings sunk to their lowest level in years last month. Harris blamed her Republican rival Donald Trump for blocking efforts to curb irregular migration.
Through bipartisan work, including some of the most conservative members of the United States Congress, a bill was crafted, which we supported, which I support. And Donald Trump got word of this bill that would have contributed to securing our border, and because he believes that it would not have helped him politically, he told his folks in Congress, don't put it forward. He killed the bill.
With just 10 weeks to go before Election Day, Harris has no time to waste introducing herself and her plans to the American public. For now, at least, her efforts seem to be paying off, with most polls giving her a narrow lead over Trump.
Let's have a look at that appearance with Andra Gillespie, who's a political scientist from Emory University. Welcome back to DW, Professor. Did this interview teach you anything about the priorities of a potential Harris administration that you didn't know before?
Well, as a political scientist, I would have to say no. But if you were a voter who hasn't been paying attention up until this point, you did get a chance to learn a little bit about Kamala Harris. You got to see how she answered questions extemporaneously. And you did get to hear some of the bullet points about what her priorities and what her values were.
And do you think that was the purpose of this interview, to introduce her to the United States, essentially?
So I think that was part of it. I think the main introduction was last week at the Democratic National Convention. She had to fulfill a promise that she had made while on the campaign trail that she would do an interview before the end of August. And she had to respond to criticisms that she had heard, not just from Republicans, but also from journalists, that she was not making herself available for a press interview. I think the reality is that while she gave a press interview that certainly is passable, she didn't make any major gaffes that I think would call into question why she ended up being the nominee for the Democratic Party and kind of had a seamless path to that nomination. I think the reality is that because of the proliferation of different types of media and other forms of contact, Harris does not have to rely on media interviews to get her message out there or to introduce herself to the American public. So in that response, yes, it does feel somewhat anticlimactic. She didn't do herself any harm with that speech, and that was the most important thing.
That was the most important thing, that she just do the interview, don't mess up.
Well, yes. I mean, in certain instances, I think many Americans remember an interview that she did with Lester Holt of NBC in the first year or so that she was vice president. And in that interview, she came across as actually pretty flippant. And most people sort of interpreted that interview as being a disaster. So she's redeemed herself in that regard. I mean, will this stand out as the best interview of all time? No, but she didn't do anything that I think would hurt her chances of becoming president.
We'll take a look at a couple of the issues that have been perceived as problematic for the Vice President. We'll start with Gaza. She was asked whether her approach to this conflict would differ from that of the current administration. She was asked, would you withhold some US weapons shipments to Israel? That's what a lot of people on the progressive left want you to do. And she didn't answer that directly, but spoke instead of the necessity of getting a deal done. What do you think stopped Kamala Harris from outlining something more substantial?
Well, I mean, I think the substance there is that she's going to continue the Biden administration's policy, and she's going to continue the longstanding U.S. policy of supporting Israel's right to exist. She does make overtures to the progressive left when she talks about a ceasefire and when she expresses empathy in full-throated terms in ways that Joe Biden not always has done for the plight of the Palestinians, especially those who are in Gaza. So in some ways, she's really trying to thread the needle and have both sides of the coin at stake, where she wants to recognize and acknowledge Palestinian suffering. She wants to continue to support the U.S.'s stated policy that's decades old now of a two-state solution. But at the same time, she also does not want to let go of the fact that Israel is a strategic ally in the region and America's closest ally in the Middle East. And so she's not going to upset that relationship as well. It's a really fine balance.
Right, because certainly lots of young Democrats do not like where she has placed herself on this.
And I think the larger question here is whether or not they would let the perfect be the enemy of the good in their point of view. So I think the question that people are having is, one, is the Harris campaign being insensitive to or not listening to those concerns? And so I think there's a lot of behind the scenes outreach that's going out to activists with respect to Gaza. And then I think it's also, well, what is the alternative? So if Donald Trump were elected president of the United States, what do you think his policy towards Gaza would be? And then asking voters to make a choice where they may not like both of their options, but there are clear differences between the two.
Let's talk about migration. As the Biden administration's immigration czar, this topic has also been seen as problematic for the VP. We heard in the report she had a question on the topic, and she took it as an opportunity to bash her opponent, Donald Trump. And so do you think that Vice President Harris is actually convincing people that she can be, quote, tough on migration?
So as far as issue ownership is concerned, I suspect that Republicans are still going to own this issue, and the voters who are very concerned about issues related to immigration tend to be voters who are predisposed to support Donald Trump anyway. I think the case that she wants to make, particularly to those voters who may be yet undecided or who might be moderate and don't like Donald Trump, is that, one, Trump is temperamentally disqualified from holding office. His actions on January 6th should be disqualifying. And when it comes to issues related to immigration, one, she does have a plan. And that, two, she supported a compromise immigration bill that was co-written by conservative Republicans that Donald Trump was able to use his influence to scuttle because of political reasons. And again, that goes back to the temperamental fitness and the character issues that I think are going to be central to Harris's offensive strategy.
What did you make of her response when she was asked about Donald Trump's false accusation that she'd only identified as black only later in life and for political gain? Same old tired playbook, she said. Next question, please, and moved on. Should she have said more?
So my research area happens to be on Black politicians who attempt to transcend race when reaching out to put a multiracial coalition together to run for office. And Vice President Harris's response was a classic deracialized response, to demur on the outright racial issue and then try to present a really transcendent front. And I think she had elements of transcendence in her discussion of wanting to bring Republicans to the table and being open to the idea of having a Republican on her cabinet. So the response was there. What she benefits from is that many surrogates had a visceral reaction to Donald Trump's claims that she wasn't black until she decided to be black a few years ago. So aside from the fact that that was patently offensive, it was also demonstrably false. And so Harris doesn't think that she needs to speak for herself, in part because so many other people have come to her defense. not every deracialized candidate has that benefit at their disposal. And so while I wouldn't necessarily sort of recommend to a candidate that they make that response, I think she's going to be able to get away with it because so many other people have spoken out on her behalf and spoken to the ridiculousness of the charge.
And why was Tim Walz there? Why was it necessary to have him there for this major presidential interview?
Well, it didn't make sense to not have Walz there, given the fact that he was physically present in Georgia and campaigning with Vice President Harris at the time. So certainly this was a nice way for a governor who had a statewide profile in his own state and in the region, but probably is still introducing himself nationally to kind of get his feet wet in a big national interview. He certainly had done the national Sunday morning talk shows as he was being considered for the vice presidency. But, you know, it would have been odd for him not to have been there, given the fact that he was present and campaigning alongside of Vice President Harris. And it certainly gave him an opportunity to have this media spotlight before he has to do those kinds of interviews on his own at some point during the election cycle.
As ever, great talking to you. Thank you so much for giving us the benefit of your insights. Political scientist Andra Gillespie from Emory University.